The security guard's hand is shaking as he swipes his keycard. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in March 2019, and Jessica Martinez is being escorted through the empty corridors of Westfield University's administration building. Her phone has been buzzing non-stop for the past hour. Reporters, friends, her terrified parents calling from their restaurant across town. 3 hours ago, she was a finance major with a 3.8 GPA and a Morgan Stanley internship lined up. Now, she's walking into what can only be described as an ambush. The conference room is packed. University President Dr. Robert Blackwood sits at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers in expensive suits. Board members fill the remaining chairs, their faces grim. Jessica notices the local news crew setting up cameras in the corner. This isn't a meeting. It's a public execution, and she's about to find out that her university's entire $180 million endowment has vanished, and somehow, according to everyone in this room, it's all her fault. Jessica wasn't a troublemaker. 24 hours earlier, she was just another senior counting down to graduation, someone who had never even received a parking ticket on campus. But as President Blackwood begins reading from a prepared statement, accusing her of financial misconduct that has jeopardized the future of this institution, Jessica realizes this is no mistake. This is a carefully orchestrated plan to make her the fall guy for something much bigger, much darker, and much more dangerous than she ever could have imagined. But here's what the administration didn't expect. Jessica fought back. And what she uncovered was a web of corruption so deep, so brazen, that it would ultimately lead to criminal charges, congressional hearings, and the resignation of an entire board of trustees. We're talking about university officials who treated the endowment like their personal casino account, making increasingly desperate bets to cover up years of embezzlement and fraud. The story you're about to hear reads like a thriller novel, but we have the internal emails, the recorded phone calls, the leaked documents, and exclusive interviews with the key players, including Jessica herself, who has never spoken publicly about this ordeal until now. This is the story of how a prestigious university gambled away the future of an entire generation of students, and how one young woman refused to let them get away with it. Before we dive into the full story, I need to warn you. What you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you think about higher education in America. Because Westfield University wasn't some rogue institution, it was following playbooks that dozens of other universities are using right now. The only difference is they got caught. So buckle up, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you could ever imagine. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Jessica Martinez might just be the most important whistleblower you've never heard of. Before we get started, each of our episodes is original and uniquely crafted to ensure you never get bored. We've launched this show with a focus on sharp, original storytelling. And as more viewers join us, you'll see everything level up: visuals, sound design, pacing, and production quality. The bigger the audience, the bolder the stories we can tell. So if you want to support us and continue seeing more episodes, subscribe and turn on the notification bell now. You're about to enter a world where money isn't just power. It's the most powerful motive. Chapter 1. The Golden University. Let me paint you a picture of Westfield University before it all went to hell. Founded in 1887, this wasn't some community college or struggling state school. We're talking about a prestigious private institution that consistently ranked in the top 50 universities nationwide, with a campus that looked like it was ripped straight from a movie about elite education. Gothic architecture, ivy-covered buildings, and perfectly manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. The $180 million endowment didn't just appear overnight. It was built over decades through careful investment and the generous donations of wealthy alumni who believed they were securing their institution's future. This money was supposed to fund scholarships for deserving students, support groundbreaking research, and maintain the university's competitive edge. Instead, it became a piggy bank for some of the most reckless gambling you've ever seen. At the center of this story is Dr. Robert Blackwood, a man who could charm the paint off a wall and had the kind of academic credentials that made parents write tuition checks without question. Harvard MBA, published author, and a public speaker who commanded five-figure fees. On paper, he was the perfect university president. In reality, he was a gambling addict who saw dollar signs every time he looked at the endowment statements. Then there's Margaret Chen, the university's chief financial officer, and the person who actually managed the day-to-day finances. Chen was brilliant. There's no other word for it. She could make numbers dance, create financial instruments that would make Wall Street jealous, and present budgets that made even the most skeptical board members nod in approval. Her talent for creative accounting would eventually become the university's downfall, but for years it made her indispensable. The third member of this unholy trinity was William Billy Thornton, the board chair, whose family name was literally carved into the university's founding stone. Billy represented old money, the kind of wealth that spans generations and comes with an unshakable sense of entitlement. He saw the university as his personal playground, and the endowment as his personal trust fund. And then there's Jessica Martinez, a first-generation college student whose parents owned a small Mexican restaurant in the town where Westfield was located. Jessica was everything the university claimed to value: hard-working, brilliant, and driven. She was studying finance with dreams of working on Wall Street, completely unaware that she was about to get a crash course in financial crime that no textbook could have prepared her for. In the years leading up to the scandal, Westfield was expanding rapidly. New buildings were going up every semester, programs were being launched, and the marketing department was working overtime to attract the best and brightest students. The campus looked like prosperity incarnate. What students and parents didn't know was that much of this growth was being funded by increasingly desperate borrowing against the endowment. Tuition was rising faster than inflation, but families were willing to pay because Westfield had a reputation for launching successful careers. The university's placement rates were impressive, and alumni were landing jobs at top firms across the country. What they didn't realize was that their children's future was being mortgaged to pay for the administration's present. By 2018, the warning signs were everywhere, but they were hidden behind a wall of complex financial instruments and misleading reports. The endowment's performance was being artificially inflated, debts were being shuffled between accounts, and anyone who asked too many questions was either transferred to a different department or quietly pushed out entirely. This is the world Jessica Martinez walked into when she accepted what she thought was a routine internship in the university's investment office. She was supposed to be helping with basic administrative tasks, filing reports, updating spreadsheets, maybe learning a thing or two about institutional investing. Instead, she stumbled into the biggest financial scandal in the university's history. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Jessica became the target of a coordinated campaign to destroy her reputation, we need to understand how the corruption started, how it escalated, and how three supposedly intelligent people convinced themselves that they could gamble with other people's money without consequences. Because that's what this story is really about: consequences. The consequences of unchecked power, of institutional arrogance, and of treating students and families like marks in a con game. The consequences of believing that your position makes you untouchable, and that the rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to you. Chapter 2. The First Red Flag. January 2019. Jessica Martinez is 3 months into her internship at Westfield University's investment office, and she's starting to notice things that don't add up. It begins with something small, a discrepancy in the monthly endowment reports that she's supposed to file. The numbers don't match between 2 different versions of the same document, and when she asks her supervisor about it, she gets a response that stops her cold. "Don't worry about those particular investments," Margaret Chen tells her, not looking up from her computer screen. Those are part of our alternative investment portfolio. Very sophisticated stuff. You wouldn't understand it. Now, Jessica might be a student, but she's not stupid. She's been studying finance for 3 years. She's aced every accounting class she's taken, and she knows condescension when she hears it. The brush-off only makes her more curious. What exactly is this alternative investment portfolio? And why is it so complicated that even a finance major can't understand it? The answer, as Jessica is about to discover, is that it's not complicated at all. It's actually quite simple. It's a slush fund for gambling. Jessica's first real clue comes when she's asked to reconcile some cryptocurrency transactions. This is 2019, remember, when Bitcoin was still considered a fringe investment for most institutional investors. But here's Westfield University, supposedly conservative with its endowment, making massive bets on digital currencies that can lose 20% of their value in a single day. The transactions she's looking at don't make sense. Large purchases followed immediately by sales at lower prices. It looks like someone is deliberately losing money, which is exactly what's happening. These aren't investments. They're a money laundering operation designed to hide the fact that the original cash has been spent elsewhere. Jessica starts staying late at the office, using her access to dig deeper into the financial records. What she finds is a pattern of increasingly desperate attempts to cover up massive losses. The cryptocurrency trades are just the tip of the iceberg. There are wire transfers to offshore accounts, payments to shell companies that don't seem to exist, and invoices for services that were never provided. But the real smoking gun is a series of emails she accidentally discovers in a shared folder. They're between President Blackwood and a contact at a private gambling club in Atlantic City. The emails are coded, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out what they're discussing. The university's position needs to be improved, Blackwood writes. Can you extend our credit line for the remainder of the semester? Jessica prints everything. She's not sure what she's going to do with the information, but her instincts tell her that she needs to document what she's seeing. These aren't just accounting irregularities. They're evidence of crimes being committed with money that's supposed to be funding scholarships and research. The intimidation starts immediately. Jessica begins receiving messages from unknown numbers, telling her to focus on her studies and stop asking questions that don't concern her. Her supervisor suddenly becomes distant, and she notices that her computer access is being restricted. Files that she could previously open are now password protected. The turning point comes when Jessica discovers that her own scholarship, the one that's allowing her to attend Westfield, has been quietly cancelled. She receives an email from the financial aid office informing her that due to budget constraints, her aid package will not be renewed for the following year. The timing is no coincidence. This is a warning shot, and Jessica knows it. But instead of backing down, Jessica doubles down. She starts making copies of documents when no one is looking, taking photos of computer screens with her phone, and recording conversations with administrators who continue to lie to her face. She's building a case, even though she doesn't yet know what she's going to do with it. The pressure intensifies when Jessica is suddenly transferred out of the investment office and into a work-study position in the library. The official reason is budget optimization. But Jessica knows better. They're trying to silence her by cutting off her access to the financial records. What the administration doesn't realize is that Jessica has already seen enough. She knows that the endowment is being systematically looted. She knows that students are being charged higher fees to cover gambling losses. And she knows that everyone involved is willing to destroy her life to keep their secrets. The question is, what is she going to do about it? Chapter 3. The Gambling Addiction. To understand how $180 million disappeared, you need to understand Robert Blackwood's relationship with risk. This wasn't a man who made one bad decision. This was a man who made a series of increasingly desperate decisions, each one designed to cover up the previous one. It started innocently enough. Blackwood was invited to a high-stakes poker game by a wealthy alumnus who wanted to discuss a potential donation. The game was held at an exclusive club in Manhattan, the kind of place where membership costs more than most people's houses. Blackwood was supposed to be there for networking, but he ended up walking away with $50,000 in winnings. That first win was like a drug. Blackwood had always been competitive, but this was different. This was pure adrenaline, the kind of rush that comes from betting big and winning bigger. He told himself he was just socializing, building relationships that would benefit the university. But the truth was simpler. He was hooked. The poker games became a regular occurrence. Then came the sports betting, the casino trips, and eventually the kind of high-stakes gambling that can bankrupt millionaires in a single night. Blackwood was betting on everything: football games, horse races, even the weather. And for a while, he was winning enough to justify the risks. But gambling addiction doesn't work that way. The wins get smaller, the losses get bigger, and eventually, you're not gambling to win any more. You're gambling to break even. That's when Blackwood made his first withdrawal from the endowment. It was just $500,000, and it was supposed to be temporary. Blackwood told himself he would put it back as soon as he hit his next big win. He even created a paper trail that made it look like a legitimate investment in a hedge fund. Margaret Chen, the CFO, helped him structure the transaction so it would pass a casual audit. But the big win never came. Instead, Blackwood lost the entire $500,000 in a single weekend at a casino in Las Vegas. That's when the real desperation set in. The cover-up required more money, which required more gambling to try to make up the difference. It was a spiral that could only end one way, but Blackwood couldn't see that. He was convinced that he was just one big win away from making everything right. Margaret Chen was the enabler who made it all possible. She was the one who figured out how to move money around without triggering red flags. She created shell companies, fabricated investment reports, and even bribed auditors to look the other way. Chen was smart enough to know that what they were doing was criminal, but she was also smart enough to know that her career was tied to Blackwood's success. Billy Thornton, the board chair, was the final piece of the puzzle. Thornton had connections throughout the financial industry, and he used those connections to facilitate the money laundering operation. He introduced Blackwood to offshore banks, private investment funds, and other wealthy gamblers who were willing to participate in what they thought were legitimate investment opportunities. The three of them created a perfect storm of corruption. Blackwood provided the addiction and the desperation. Chen provided the technical expertise to hide the crimes. Thornton provided the connections to make it all look legitimate. By 2018, they were stealing money faster than they could cover it up. The endowment was being depleted at a rate of $2 million per month, but the official reports showed steady growth. They were raising student fees to cover basic operating expenses, while telling families that the increases were necessary to maintain the university's high standards. The gambling wasn't just limited to Blackwood anymore. Chen had developed her own addiction to day trading, using university funds to make increasingly risky bets on individual stocks. Thornton was using his position to funnel money to his own business ventures, including a failed real estate development that cost the university $15 million. They were all in too deep to stop, but they were also too arrogant to believe they would get caught. They had convinced themselves that they were too smart, too connected, and too essential to the university's success to face consequences. That arrogance would prove to be their downfall, because while they were busy covering up their crimes, a finance student named Jessica Martinez was documenting everything they did. Chapter 4. The Cover-Up Machine. By the time Jessica Martinez started her internship, the cover-up operation at Westfield University had become a sophisticated machine. What started as a simple lie about investment returns had evolved into a multi-layered conspiracy involving fake documents, bribed officials, and a network of shell companies that would make a cartel jealous. Margaret Chen was the architect of this deception. She had transformed the university's financial reporting system into a house of mirrors where every number could be manipulated and every transaction could be hidden. The endowment statements that went to the board showed steady 8% annual returns, while the real accounts showed losses that would make your blood run cold. The fake investment reports were works of art. Chen would create detailed analysis of non-existent hedge funds, complete with performance charts and risk assessments. She even hired a graphic designer to make the documents look professional. Board members would receive thick packets of financial data that told a story of careful stewardship and steady growth, when the reality was that their endowment was being flushed down the toilet, one poker hand at a time. The auditing firm that was supposed to provide independent oversight was anything but independent. The lead auditor, Thomas Brennan, was receiving $50,000 per year in consulting fees from a shell company controlled by Billy Thornton. In exchange, Brennan would sign off on financial statements without actually reviewing the underlying transactions. When Brennan finally started asking uncomfortable questions in late 2018, Chen had a solution for that too. She fabricated a romantic relationship with him, complete with staged photos and fake love letters. When Brennan threatened to expose the fraud, Chen threatened to expose their affair to his wife and professional colleagues. It was blackmail, pure and simple, but it was effective. The cryptocurrency wash trading operation was perhaps the most brazen part of the cover-up. Chen would use university funds to purchase Bitcoin and other digital currencies, then immediately sell them at a loss to accounts controlled by Thornton's shell companies. The transactions were structured to look like legitimate investments, but they were actually a way to move stolen money out of the university's accounts. The beauty of the crypto scheme was that it was almost impossible to trace. Digital currencies are designed to be anonymous, and the transactions were routed through exchanges in countries with strict banking secrecy laws. Even if someone suspected fraud, they would have a nearly impossible time proving where the money went. But the cover-up required more than just financial engineering. It required silencing anyone who might expose the truth. The university's financial aid office was instructed to cancel scholarships for any student who worked in the investment office. The official reason was always budget constraints, but the real reason was to prevent students from seeing too much. Faculty members who asked questions about the university's financial health were quietly pushed out. Professor Michael Rodriguez, who taught economics and had started questioning the university's expansion plans, was suddenly denied tenure despite having published more research than any other faculty member in his department. When he appealed the decision, he was told that his attitude was not aligned with the university's values. Even the campus newspaper was controlled. The student editor who tried to investigate the university's finances was told that her investigation was potentially libelous, and that she could face legal action if she published her findings. The story was killed, and the editor was quietly replaced at the end of the semester. The administration had created a culture of fear where asking questions was dangerous, and reporting irregularities was career suicide. It was a system designed to protect the criminals and silence the whistleblowers. But systems like that only work if everyone stays quiet. And Jessica Martinez was about to prove that not everyone could be silenced. Student fees were being raised every semester, and this money was not being used for improving education quality. The cruelest irony was that the university was simultaneously launching a campaign to raise money for student scholarships. Wealthy alumni were being asked to donate money to help low-income students afford a Westfield education. The marketing department was working overtime to maintain the university's reputation. Press releases about new programs and facilities were carefully crafted to hide the financial chaos behind the scenes. The university was even hiring expensive public relations firms to manage its image using stolen money to pay for spin doctors. By early 2019, the cover-up operation was consuming more resources than the original crimes. Chen was spending 80% of her time creating fake documents and managing the lies. Thornton was using his board position to quash any investigation attempts. Blackwood was making increasingly desperate bets, trying to win back enough money to make the whole problem disappear. They were all running out of time, and they knew it. The next external audit was scheduled for the fall of 2019, and they knew they wouldn't be able to fool a truly independent review. They needed a scapegoat, someone to blame for the missing money. That's when they decided to frame Jessica Martinez. Chapter 5. Jessica's investigation. Jessica Martinez knew she was in danger the moment her scholarship was cancelled. It wasn't just the financial pressure. Although losing $40,000 in aid was devastating for a family that barely made ends meet. It was the message behind the cancellation. We can destroy your future whenever we want. But instead of backing down, Jessica decided to go all in. If they were going to destroy her life anyway, she was going to make sure she took them down with her. Working in the library gave Jessica something the administration hadn't expected: time and access to research databases. While she couldn't access the university's financial systems anymore, she could access public records, SEC filings, and news articles about the companies that were supposedly managing the endowment. What she found was shocking. Half of the investment firms listed in the university's reports didn't exist. The addresses were fake, the phone numbers were disconnected, and the supposed fund managers were either dead or had never worked in finance. The university's endowment was being managed by ghosts. Jessica started staying at the library until closing time, using her student ID to access academic databases that contained information about financial fraud. She was learning about money laundering techniques, offshore banking, and the warning signs of institutional corruption. She was essentially giving herself a masterclass in white-collar crime. The breakthrough came when Jessica discovered that she could access the university's email system through the library computers. The IT department had apparently forgotten to revoke her access when she was transferred out of the investment office. It was a mistake that would prove fatal to the cover-up. Late one night in February 2019, Jessica logged into the system and started reading emails. What she found was a treasure trove of evidence: emails between Blackwood and gambling contacts, messages from Chen to shell company operators, communications between Thornton and offshore bankers. It was all there, in writing, documenting years of systematic theft. The most damning evidence was an email thread between the three conspirators discussing what to do about the Martinez problem. They were planning to frame Jessica for the missing money, claiming that she had used her access to the financial systems to steal from the endowment. They even had a detailed plan for how to plant evidence and manipulate the narrative. Jessica printed everything. She spent hours at the library's printers, creating copies of thousands of emails, financial reports, and internal documents. She organized the evidence chronologically, creating a timeline of the corruption that would be easy for investigators to follow. But Jessica wasn't just collecting evidence. She was also documenting the human cost of the fraud. She tracked down students whose scholarships had been cancelled, families who had been forced to take out additional loans, and faculty members who had been pushed out for asking questions. She was building a case not just for financial fraud, but for the systematic destruction of educational opportunity. The most heartbreaking discovery was that the university's emergency fund, money that was supposed to help students in crisis, had been completely depleted. Students who were struggling to pay for food and housing were being told that no assistance was available, while their tuition money was being spent on gambling debts. Jessica also discovered that the university had been borrowing money against future donations, essentially selling the loyalty of alumni to pay for current expenses. Donors who thought they were supporting scholarships were actually funding a criminal enterprise. By March 2019, Jessica had assembled what amounted to a federal case. She had documented evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. She had identified the players, traced the money, and established a clear pattern of criminal behavior. But she also knew that she was running out of time. The emails she was reading made it clear that the administration was planning to move against her soon. They were going to destroy her reputation, ruin her career prospects, and possibly have her arrested on fabricated charges. Jessica made a decision that would change everything. She was going to record her final conversation with the university administration, and she was going to make sure that their plan to frame her was documented in their own words. On March 15th, 2019, President Blackwood requested a meeting with Jessica, as she claimed to discover irregularities in the financial records and wanted to discuss her concerns. She determined the right move would be to wear a wire. Chapter 6. The Scapegoating. The meeting was supposed to be private, but when Jessica arrived at President Blackwood's office, she found herself facing a room full of lawyers and board members. It was clear that this wasn't a discussion. It was an interrogation. "Ms. Martinez," Blackwood began, his voice carefully modulated. "We've asked you here because we've discovered some very serious irregularities in our financial systems. Irregularities that appear to be connected to your access to our investment accounts." Jessica felt her heart racing. She was the one who had found the irregularities. She kept her voice steady. "What kind of irregularities?" Margaret Chen stepped forward with a folder full of documents. "We've identified approximately $50 million in unauthorized transactions that were initiated using your login credentials. These transactions appear to be attempts to move university funds to offshore accounts." The documents looked official, complete with Jessica's supposed digital signature and timestamps showing when the transactions were made. But Jessica knew they were fabricated. She had never had access to the accounts they were describing, and she had never authorized any offshore transfers. "This is impossible," Jessica said, her voice getting louder. "I never had access to those accounts. I was just an intern filing reports." Billy Thornton, the board chair, leaned forward with a sympathetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Jessica, we understand this is difficult. Financial pressure can make people do things they wouldn't normally do. Your family's restaurant is struggling. Your scholarship was cancelled. These are stressful situations." Jessica realized what was happening. They weren't just accusing her of theft. They were creating a psychological profile that would make the accusations seem plausible. The struggling student, the cancelled scholarship, the family business in trouble. It was a perfect setup. "We're prepared to handle this quietly, if you are," Blackwood continued. "You can transfer to another university. We won't press charges, and this whole unfortunate situation can be forgotten. But you need to sign a statement acknowledging your responsibility for these transactions." Jessica looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. These were people she had trusted, people who were supposed to be educators and mentors. Instead, they were criminals trying to destroy her life to save their own. "I'm not signing anything," Jessica said firmly, "because I didn't do anything wrong. And you all know that." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The sympathetic expressions disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. Chen spoke first. "Ms. Martinez, you don't seem to understand the gravity of your situation. We have evidence of your theft. We have documentation of your unauthorized access to restricted systems. We have witnesses who can testify to your suspicious behavior." "What witnesses?" Jessica demanded. "The security guard who saw you in the building after hours, the IT administrator who logged your unauthorized access attempts, the supervisor who noticed your unusual interest in confidential financial information." Jessica realized that every aspect of her investigation had been monitored and weaponized against her. Her late nights in the library, her questions about the financial reports, her access to the email system. It was all being reframed as evidence of criminal behavior. But what they didn't know was that Jessica was recording everything. The wire she was wearing was capturing every word, every threat, every detail of their plan to frame her. Thornton pulled out his phone and showed Jessica a draft press release. "This goes out tomorrow morning, unless you sign the statement. Westfield University student arrested for embezzlement. Your name, your photo, your family's business. It will all be in the news. Jessica felt sick. They weren't just threatening her. They were threatening her family. Her parents had worked their entire lives to build their restaurant, and these people were willing to destroy it to protect their own crimes. "You have until midnight tonight to decide," Blackwood said. "After that, we go public with everything." Jessica stood up, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Blackwood said, with a smile that made her skin crawl. "Take all the time you need. But remember, we're trying to help you here. This is your chance to make this go away quietly." As Jessica left the office, she heard Chen whisper to Thornton, "Think she'll sign?" Thornton's response was barely audible, but Jessica's recording device caught every word. "Doesn't matter. We're destroying her either way." That night, Jessica sat in her dorm room and made the most important decision of her life. She wasn't going to sign their statement. She wasn't going to let them destroy her family. And she wasn't going to let them get away with stealing from thousands of students and families. She was going to fight back. Chapter 7. Fighting Back. Jessica Martinez made 3 phone calls that night that would change everything. The first was to her parents, telling them that they needed to prepare for their family to be in the news. The second was to the FBI field office in the state capital, reporting financial crimes at a major university. The third was to an investigative journalist who had been covering corruption in higher education. But before she made those calls, Jessica did something that would prove to be crucial. She uploaded every piece of evidence she had collected to a secure cloud storage account. Thousands of emails, financial documents, audio recordings, and photographs. She created multiple copies and shared access with several people, including a lawyer her family's accountant had recommended. The FBI agent who took her call was initially skeptical. Student complaints about university administration were common, and most of them turned out to be misunderstandings or personal grievances. But when Jessica mentioned $180 million in missing endowment funds and offered to provide recorded conversations, the agent's tone changed immediately. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to come to our office first thing tomorrow morning, and I need you to not discuss this with anyone else until we've had a chance to review your evidence." Jessica spent the night organizing her evidence and preparing for what she knew would be the most important meeting of her life. She created a presentation that laid out the timeline of the fraud, identified the key players, and documented the cover-up attempts. She was treating this like the most important final exam she would ever take. The next morning, Jessica walked into the FBI field office with a USB drive containing terabytes of evidence and a detailed written statement that read like a thriller novel. The agents who interviewed her were stunned by the scope and sophistication of the fraud she was describing. "You're telling us that the university president has been using endowment funds to pay gambling debts?" Agent Sarah Chen asked. "That's just the beginning," Jessica replied. "They've been stealing money for yours, and they've been covering it up by creating fake investment funds and bribing auditors." Agent Chen looked at her partner, Agent David Rodriguez. They had been investigating white-collar crime for decades, but they had never seen a case quite like this. The audacity of the fraud was matched only by the sophistication of the cover-up. "Ms. Martinez, you understand that these are extremely serious allegations. If you're wrong about this, you could face charges for making false statements to federal agents." Jessica had expected this warning, and she was ready for it. "I'm not wrong. I have documentation for everything I'm telling you, and I have recordings of them planning to frame me for their crimes." She played the recording from her meeting with Blackwood, Chen, and Thornton. The agents listened in silence as they heard university officials discussing how to plant evidence and manipulate the narrative to make Jessica look guilty. "Holy shit," Agent Rodriguez whispered. "They're not just stealing money. They're conspiring to commit fraud." Agent Chen nodded. "This is going to be a major case. We're talking about multiple federal crimes, millions of dollars in losses, and a conspiracy that goes to the top of the university administration." The agents explained that they would need to conduct a full investigation, which could take months. They would need to interview witnesses, analyze financial records, and build a case that would stand up in court. Jessica would need to be patient, and she would need to be careful. "These people are dangerous," Agent Chen warned. "They've already shown that they're willing to destroy your reputation to protect themselves. We need to assume that they're capable of worse." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on gathering evidence that she hadn't fully considered the personal risk she was taking. These weren't just white-collar criminals. They were people with connections, resources, and a willingness to destroy anyone who threatened them. But it was too late to back down now. Jessica had already made her choice, and she was going to see it through to the end. The investigation moved quickly once the FBI got involved. Within a week, federal agents were interviewing current and former university employees, analyzing financial records, and tracing the flow of money through the offshore accounts. The scope of the fraud was even larger than Jessica had suspected. The cryptocurrency wash trading operation had processed over $75 million in stolen funds. The fake investment reports had been sent to board members for over 3 years. The bribery scheme had involved not just the external auditor, but also several state officials who were supposed to oversee the university's finances. But the most shocking discovery was that the fraud wasn't limited to Westfield University. The FBI uncovered evidence that similar schemes were operating at dozens of other institutions across the country. The techniques that Chen had developed were being shared through a network of corrupt financial officers who were all stealing from their own institutions. This wasn't just a case of isolated corruption. It was a systematic attack on higher education funding that had been going on for years. 3 weeks after Jessica's first meeting with the FBI, federal agents raided the university campus. They seized computers, financial records, and personal files from dozens of offices. They interviewed hundreds of employees and students, and they arrested 3 people: President Robert Blackwood, CFO Margaret Chen, and board chair Billy Thornton. The arrests made national news, the story of how a student intern had uncovered a massive fraud scheme captured the public's imagination. Jessica found herself thrust into the spotlight as a whistleblower and a hero. But the story was far from over. The arrests were just the beginning of a legal process that would take years to complete and would ultimately expose corruption throughout the entire higher education system. Chapter 8. The Dominoes Fall. The arrests of Blackwood, Chen, and Thornton sent shockwaves through the higher education community. But what happened next proved that the corruption was even deeper than anyone had imagined. The first domino to fall was Thomas Brennan, the auditor who had been taking bribes to sign off on fake financial statements. When FBI agents showed up at his office with a warrant, they found him frantically shredding documents. The evidence they recovered showed that Brennan had been facilitating fraud at 17 different universities across 6 states. Brennan's cooperation with federal investigators opened up an entirely new dimension of the case. He provided names, dates, and financial records that exposed a network of corrupt auditors, administrators, and board members who had been systematically looting educational institutions for over a decade. But the most dramatic moment came on a Tuesday morning in April 2019, when federal agents arrived at the plump Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City to arrest Robert Blackwood. They found the former university president at a high-stakes poker table, down $300,000, and desperately trying to win back money that was already stolen. The image of Blackwood being led away in handcuffs, while still clutching his poker chips, became the defining photo of the entire scandal. The search of Blackwood's hotel room revealed evidence that investigators hadn't expected to find. Hidden in a hotel safe were USB drives containing financial records from dozens of other universities, along with detailed instructions for replicating the fraud scheme that had destroyed Westfield. Blackwood hadn't just been stealing from his own institution, he had been selling the blueprint for institutional theft to administrators across the country. Margaret Chen's arrest was less dramatic but more revealing. When agents searched her home, they found a sophisticated command center with multiple computer monitors, encrypted hard drives, and detailed spreadsheets tracking the movement of stolen funds. Chen had been operating like a criminal mastermind, coordinating the theft and money laundering for multiple institutions simultaneously. The evidence recovered from Chen's home showed that she had been in contact with offshore bankers, cryptocurrency exchanges, and shell company operators in 17 different countries. The scope of the money laundering operation was staggering. Over $500 million in stolen educational funds had been processed through her network over the past 5 years. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from Billy Thornton's arrest. When federal agents arrived at his estate in the Hamptons, they found him burning documents in his backyard. The papers that survived the fire revealed that Thornton had been using his board positions at multiple institutions to facilitate a pyramid scheme that involved dozens of wealthy donors and board members. Thornton's scheme was diabolical in its simplicity. He would convince wealthy donors to make large contributions to university endowments, then immediately steal those donations and use them to pay earlier investors. The universities were essentially being used as fronts for a massive Ponzi scheme that had defrauded philanthropists out of hundreds of millions of dollars. The investigation revealed that Thornton had been operating this scheme for over 7 years, using his reputation and social connections to recruit new victims. Some of the most prominent names in American philanthropy had been defrauded, including several billionaires who thought they were funding educational initiatives. As the arrests continued, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about 3 criminals at one university. It was about a systematic corruption of American higher education that involved hundreds of administrators, board members, and financial professionals. The FBI's investigation uncovered evidence of fraud at 17 different universities across 6 states. The total amount of stolen funds exceeded $970 million, making it one of the largest financial fraud cases in American history. The ripple effects extended far beyond the universities themselves. Donors stopped giving to educational institutions. State funding was reduced due to public outrage, and accreditation agencies began conducting emergency reviews of financial practices at institutions across the country. The case also exposed the inadequacy of oversight mechanisms in higher education. State agencies that were supposed to monitor university finances had been captured by the same corruption they were meant to prevent. Accreditation organizations had been looking the other way, as long as institutions continued paying their fees, and federal education officials had been ignoring warning signs for years. By the fall of 2019, the scandal had consumed the entire higher education establishment. Congressional hearings were announced, new regulations were proposed, and university presidents across the country were being forced to resign as public trust in institutional leadership collapsed. But perhaps the most shocking development was yet to come. Billy Thornton, facing a potential life sentence in federal prison, was found knocked out in his cell just days before he was scheduled to testify before Congress. The official cause of knockout was listed as self-KO, but investigators found evidence that suggested Thornton might have been murdered to prevent him from revealing even more damaging information about the conspiracy. Chapter 9. Justice and Consequences. The trials of Robert Blackwood and Margaret Chen became a media sensation that exposed the depths of corruption in American higher education. For 8 months, prosecutors laid out a case that read like a crime novel, complete with secret offshore accounts, forged documents, and a conspiracy that spanned multiple countries. Blackwood's trial was particularly dramatic. Prosecutors have played recordings of his conversations with gambling contacts, showing how he had systematically stolen millions of dollars to fund his addiction. The evidence showed that Blackwood had lost over $45 million in gambling debts, while simultaneously cutting student services and raising tuition rates. The most damaging testimony came from former students whose lives had been destroyed by Blackwood's crimes. Jessica Martinez took the stand and described how the university had tried to frame her for the theft, playing recordings of administrators planning to destroy her reputation. Her testimony was so powerful that several jurors were seen wiping away tears. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when prosecutors revealed that Blackwood had been stealing money, even while he was on trial. Using a hidden cryptocurrency account, he had continued gambling with funds that were supposed to be held in escrow for restitution. The judge immediately revoked his bail and ordered him held without release. Margaret Chen's defense strategy was to claim that she had been manipulated by Blackwood and Thornton, portraying herself as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. But prosecutors demolished this argument by showing that Chen had been the architect of the entire money laundering operation, creating the systems and procedures that made the massive theft possible. The evidence against Chen was overwhelming. Prosecutors showed that she had personally stolen over $12 million from university accounts, using the money to purchase luxury homes, expensive cars, and even a yacht. They also proved that she had been taking bribes from financial firms in exchange for steering university investments to their funds. Both defendants were convicted on all counts. Blackwood was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, while Chen received a 28-year sentence. The judge in both cases described their crimes as a betrayal of the public trust that strikes at the heart of American education. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning of the reckoning. The civil lawsuits that followed would ultimately force fundamental changes in how universities manage their finances and report to the public. The class action lawsuit filed on behalf of affected students and families resulted in a $749 million settlement, the largest educational fraud settlement in American history. The money came from insurance policies, asset seizures, and contributions from other universities that wanted to avoid being associated with the scandal. Jessica Martinez, who had become the face of the whistleblower movement in higher education, received a $2.3 million award from the settlement. She graduated with highest honors and went on to work for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, where she continues to investigate corruption in educational institutions. Westfield University was forced into bankruptcy. Blackwood died in federal prison 3 years into his sentence. Chen was released on parole in 2023 and works at a tax preparation service in Ohio under her maiden name. As for the $180 million endowment that was supposed to secure the future of thousands of students, it was never recovered. The money vanished into offshore accounts, cryptocurrency exchanges, and casino vaults, a reminder that some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. The real tragedy isn't just the money that was stolen. It's the dreams that were deferred, the families that went into debt, and the trust that was shattered. Because when institutions meant to educate and elevate instead choose to deceive and steal, they don't just rob bank accounts, they rob futures. And that's a crime that no settlement can ever fully repair. Now I leave you with this quote: "Greed is a bottomless pit, which exhausts the person in an endless effort to satisfy the need without ever reaching satisfaction." If you enjoyed this episode, surely you'll like this one too. Please subscribe and then watch another. Go ahead, it's free after all, and legal